Thank you, Nate. And hello, everyone from sunny Florida. Welcome. This is a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart. After being a program director for 22 years, I always had a lot of questions about what we could do to kind of diminish this issue. So let's go ahead and get started. So first off, I need to let you know that I am not an attorney. I have no legal background or training. This is just a presentation that I've done through experience and through lots of research. So I hope that you get something out of it today. First of all, let's talk about what is academic dishonesty. Well, there are many answers out there in the literature. I'm just going to share a few of them with you. And again, I have 3 pages of references that you can look at if you're so inclined later in the presentation. So academic dishonesty, basically it's committing or contributing to dishonest acts by those engaged in teaching, learning, research, and other related academic activities. And what I thought was interesting is that it doesn't just apply to students, but it also applies to everyone in the academic setting. Also, Northern Illinois University had what I consider to be an interesting definition. They said that not only do they consider it a serious offense, but it is considered a problem whether or not it was committed intentionally or not. So, gosh, I didn't know that was considered cheating is not a good excuse for this. There's a lot of different forms that academic dishonesty can take, and there's lots of research going way back to 1978 that tries to define it. And some of the things that are considered academic dishonesty would be cheating, fabrication or falsification, plagiarism, which I know that as a program director and as an instructor, we encountered a fair amount of, but sabotage. And I thought, wow, sabotage, that's kind of scary. So what does that mean? Well, in some of the definitions that I found through the literature, I found this: academic dishonesty or academic misconduct, any type of cheating occurring in relation to a formal academic exercise. And then it can include the following things. Plagiarism, again, that is the one that I ran into most frequently. Basically taking credit for ideas, words, or statements that are not yours or that you do not provide acknowledgement for. Fabrication, now I thought this was interesting, falsification of data information or even false citations in any formal academic exercise. Deception, giving false information to an instructor. In other words, the dog ate my homework, my kid crashed my computer or whatever. So that's still academic dishonesty. And again, cheating, any attempt to give or obtain assistance, like cheating on an exam without due acknowledgement. And finally, sabotage. That's the one that scared me a little bit. Acting to prevent others from completing their work. Now, fortunately, I've never run into this one. But believe it or not, and again, this came from Berkeley City College, cutting pages out of library books or willfully disrupting the experiments of others. Wow, that's kind of scary. So as I was going over this and preparing for my presentation today, I thought maybe I'd ask you some questions. First of all, have you ever had to deal with an academic dishonesty issue in your classroom? And you see that the is up there. And then the second part of that question is also, if you have, what was the issue? And again, that's a multiple choice. So let's take a few seconds here to go ahead and answer those. And then Nate, if you could share with us what the results are. How are we doing with some results, Nate?
So far, 100% yeses on the have you had to deal with academic dishonesty.
Okay. Holy cat. Well, I can't say that I'm surprised, unfortunately. Oh, great. Now here are the results from Nate. And again, oh, now this is interesting. Assistance from others was the #1 issue, closely followed by plagiarism. Fortunately, no sabotage, but wow, a surprisingly high number of deception, 25%. And with the lowest being fabrication and 29% use of unauthorized resources. Well, thank you everyone for sharing that. So that's our first polling question. So I think we're seeing then that yes, this is actually a problem. Well, According to Dr. Donald McCabe, who works with the International Center for Academic Integrity, he too said that this is an issue. And when I was trying to do some research to find out the incidence of academic dishonesty, I wanted to get an idea of, is there a difference between undergraduates and graduates? Well, if you look at this slide here, you'll see that there were about 17,000 undergraduates responding and about 71,300 graduate students responding. And here's what kind of caught my attention. Look at the difference between academic dishonesty and the graduate students versus the undergraduate students. Now, I don't know how you feel, but that scares me because a lot of these are professions, including health professions, physicians, engineers, architects, accountants, nurses. This is very troubling to me. As I was preparing for this, I did try and go back to that website that I listed there on the bottom to find out if Dr. McCabe had updated this study, and at this time he has not. But this information came over a 12-year period between fall of 2002 and spring of 2015. To me, this is very scary. So this is college students. Well, what do we think about high school students for those of you that teach dual enrollment or that have high school programs? Well, guess what? He did another survey, this one of high school students, over 70,000 high school students in over 24 high schools. And in fact, 64% of those students admitted to cheating on a test, 58% admitted to plagiarizing, and here's what really scares me. 95% said that they had participated in some form of cheating. And it didn't matter what sort, but just some form of cheating. So this scares me, folks. I think this is something that we really need to pay attention to. So as I was, again, preparing for this presentation, I went through a lot of literature, and there's a lot out there. And I ran into something that I had never heard of before, and that is called the fraud triangle theory. So this kind of helps explain, and in these authors' opinions, why we have academic dishonesty. First, just a little bit about this fraud triangle theory. For those of you with any kind of a financial or economic background, you may have heard of this before. It actually was first developed applying to financial crimes. But more and more in the literature, you'll see now that it also applies to pretty much anything, including academic fraud. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, academic dishonesty is fraud. And what these authors suggested is that the use of this theory can help determine ethical attitudes of students. There's 3 legs to this triangle, kind of like the PAT, if you remember that from pediatrics. And that is perceived pressure, or sometimes also called incentive. The next leg is perceived opportunity. And then the 3rd leg is rationalization. Now, when we're talking about pressure or incentive, what the authors were referring to is a situation or a condition that results from individuals or other parties that creates motivation or pressure to commit fraud. Okay? Opportunity is the existence of circumstances which allow fraud to be conducted. And finally, rationalization is the perception of individuals towards those fraudulent acts as being in line with their code of ethics. That's why in many of the variations of the fraud triangle theory, you will see ethical risk in the middle. That's kind of like, well, you know what, everybody's doing it, so it's okay. But interestingly, in some of the literature that I reviewed, I also found the opposite. In fact, there are some places where it is not okay to cheat, and if your peers find out that you are, then you will be ostracized. I thought that was interesting, so I was glad to see that at least the opposite is true. It's not just, everyone's doing it, it is okay. So there's still some hope for the world, I guess. And then on the second article that I have cited here, they did a study using this fraud triangle theory in academia, and their study showed that the only 2 legs of the triangle that actually had an effect on academic fraud, that is in their study in 2018, was perceived pressure or incentive and rationalization. So they also cited a couple other variables, self-efficacy and religiosity, but those did not have an impact on academic fraud. So a very interesting theory. If you have any interest in this at all, I did cite these studies in my references. Very, very interesting reading. So I encourage you, if you have the time and the desire, to look it up. Why does academic honesty occur? Well, there's a 2016 study by Sabley that said this is some of the reasons that they believe cheating occurs. Financial pressure. How many folks in your programs are actually doing this to get a better job, or to go from EMT to paramedic, or because their employer is requiring it, or they won't have a job? So again, financial pressure is a big one. They also suggested too that having to work while studying or while being in college can put more pressure on people to be academically dishonest. Interesting. I think that's something that I'd like to research a little more, but they felt that that was a significant factor. Another one is time constraints, but also lack of preparation. So it's not just the external forces, there's also some intrinsic factors as well. In other words, it is up to the student to prepare for their assignments and their exams. Again, we mentioned this one a little bit, peer pressure. And again, peer pressure can be positive or negative. Yes, everybody's doing it, so it's okay. Or no, that's not something that we tolerate or believe in here. So again, that's going to affect the student. Another interesting factor that was cited is pressure from families to achieve success. And I was reading this, I thought, well, gosh, you know, all of our parents and all of our families have always wanted us to succeed. But this went a little bit further. And what they were saying is that it's not just that sometimes families put excessive pressures on students to succeed. It can also, again, go the other way around. If you come from a family where honesty, integrity, values are strongly ingrained in your upbringing, then you may not have that pressure. You may have the pressure to achieve success, but it may not cause you to lean towards being academically dishonest. And finally, this one I thought was very interesting, and honestly, I'd not thought of it before. But with foreign or ESL students, sometimes they feel that they have to do things that perhaps may not be, I'll say, demonstrate integrity, because they may not be able to comprehend the material or the instructions. And I live in Florida, like I told you, and we do have a lot of non-English speaking or English as a second language students. So this is something that really is of interest to me, and I think that I'm going to be looking into that further, because honestly, like I said, I'd not thought of it before. So some interesting suggestions as to why people cheat. Another question that I've always wondered about is there a difference between online and traditional students? So that leads us to our next polling question. And I'd like to know, what do you believe is more prevalent? Do you believe that cheating is more prevalent in face-to-face classes or in online classes? So we'll take a few seconds here to let you think about that, and we'll see what kind of answers we get. Obviously, with the COVID thing going on, we got more online classes going on, so it'd be interesting to see what you think. Wow, very interesting. Thanks, Nate. 89% of you believe that there's more cheating going on in online classes and only 11% in face-to-face. Very interesting. Well, I was kind of surprised by the results, and let me share that with you here. This is from a study from Promoting Academic Integrity in Online Education, and I was surprised when I saw this. The answer is yes. In other words, it's pretty common in both. If you look at this chart, you'll see this was 635 undergraduate and graduate students. The online is on the left and the live classes are on the right. The top line is the students who admit to cheating. Online 32.7, face-to-face 32.1. Well, that's pretty close. It's pretty similar. Of those, how many students were caught cheating? Online 2.1% versus 4.9% live. I think that makes sense. When we're proctoring tests or whatever, I think it's a little bit easier to catch cheating. The next one, students who received test or quiz answers from another student who had already taken it. Online 20.3, live class 33.2. Not surprised there. Because I know a lot of us, when we offer our online tests, either bring everybody in or offer it virtually during a certain time frame. So obviously there's ways to decrease that from happening. And finally, students given answers during a test from another student. Again, online 23.3 versus live class 18.1%. Again, pretty close. So their bottom line was, although you have a higher percentage of students who admitted to cheating that are in the online environment, there was actually a larger number of students admitted to cheating in live classes. So like I said, the answer is yes. It's really pretty close in both. Again, I said that I did a lot of reviews and literature review for this, and I found a lot of literature from all over the world. And ladies and gentlemen, we all have common problems, and this is one of them. Most of the information that I sought was from nursing, pharmacy, medicine, education, and engineering disciplines, because that's who had the most written on it. Another interesting 2016 review was talking about and growing evidence that suggests a positive correlation between academic dishonesty and professional dishonesty. So the premise of my webinar here, yes, academic dishonesty does transfer into the workplace. And there's many studies out there to prove it. When we're talking about medicine and allied health students in particular, all the way back in 1999, there was a study that actually suggested that, in fact, students that do cheat will actually see these behaviors as normal. And what's scary then is that they'll actually transport these into other contexts, such as patient care. Now, many of us as educators know what is the number one thing that students or actually everybody, all one, I can't say all. What is the number one thing that is not reported correctly or not always done correctly in a PCR? It's counting respirations, right? So that's something that we need to tell our students, not only tell them, hey, not only this is not okay, but why? And we don't want them to transfer that into their behaviors once they graduate from our programs. More about that later. There was also a 2014 study, again, that demonstrated that positive correlation between permissive moral attitudes, in other words, this is okay, to cheating in the classroom, and then transferring that into the clinical setting. Folks, this bothers me, this scares me, because as we get older, and I am getting older, these are the people that are going to be taking care of us. So we want to make sure that we educate our folks coming behind us accurately. Now, I was in the reserves for 28 years, and I always like to think that, you know, the military academies and the military, you know, integrity is one of our core values. So I thought, well, just for the heck of it, let me look and see if this is a problem in the military academies. Well, guess what? Absolutely it is. But it was a little bit different in the military academies. And in fact, it's not so much that there was an act of omission as much as an act of commission. And what I mean by that is that it's not so much that these cadets actually cheated themselves, it's more that they didn't report it when they saw it. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with military academies, they actually have to sign an honor code. And not only does it say that they will not lie, cheat, or steal, they also say that we will not tolerate anyone who does. So, an act of commission and an act of omission are the same thing. 62% of these cadets had said that they had seen other cadets violating this honor code at least once, but only 9% actually reported these violations. Wow. That's kind of interesting. Okay, so toleration of dishonest acts by others seem to be by far the most significant contributing force behind one's own subsequent dishonesty. Interesting, interesting. Let me share with you a real world example. Again, I told you I live in Florida. In our Florida statute, it actually says that it's mandatory for licensed nurses to report to the Florida Department of Health or to the Florida Intervention Project for Nurses, that's for impaired nurses, any person in violation of that section. But you know what? It's not easy to squeal or to narc or whatever to turn someone in, especially if it's someone you work with, it's somebody you know. So obviously any of us would be bound to struggle with this. It's a very, very difficult decision. And in fact, the research that went along with this shows that the experienced older nurses are the ones that are more likely to report impairment. Well, why would that be? That's because the older, more experienced nurses have actually seen the negative impact that can happen not only on patient care, but on colleagues and on the impaired nurse themselves. So again, it's important that we share this and we integrate this in our academic settings, but not just in that. We also need to do this in our continuing education courses as well. So this has implications for Con Ed as well as initial education. So what's the bottom line here? Well, the bottom line is that academic dishonesty does continue in the workplace. But the problem is it creates a threat to patient safety and well-being. Again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you dishonesty is fraud. Okay, it is fraud. It is a major problem, not just in business, but in healthcare as well. And it costs all of us. It costs our patients, it costs our employers, and it costs employees billions of dollars a year. And if that's not bad enough, it erodes the trust that people have in us. And I think that is such a sad thing. We are well respected in our communities because, you know, I think we all do a good job. But you know what? We don't want to lose that trust. We don't want that to be eroded. So I'm going to share with you a real life example that I experienced as a program director. For those of you that are program directors or lead instructors, have you ever gotten that call on Saturday morning from one of your clinical instructors that says, I need you to come here right away? Well, this is what happened. And in fact, the college that I retired from required an ethics class for all students. That was part of their answer to promoting academic integrity. And my question is, does this really work? Well, guess what? I'm not sure. This is, again, a true story. This was one of my preceptors who actually was charged with the sale of prescription drugs. And yes, those are symbols on there because even though it's public record, I wanted to black out his name. Not had a previous criminal record in Florida. And on that particular Saturday morning, this young man was actually charged with 16 separate counts, which included the sale, delivery, and possession of oxys, morphine, and some other things. And he was taken to the Pinellas County Jail, held on $200,000 bail. He actually, the sheriff's office actually made an undercover purchase, believe it or not, at the ER where one of my EMT students was unfortunately being precepted with him that morning. He worked there part-time as a paramedic. They found more than 180 pills on him, and so he went to jail, and in fact he was convicted, and of course lost his job, his paramedic cert, and everything else. Basically, his life is done. So an interesting caveat to this, as I said, this guy was precepting one of my EMT students. We had already removed him sometime prior from precepting students in the field, but as many of you may know, when you're in the hospitals, you don't always have a choice as to who precepts your students. So anyway, this gentleman had an EMT student with him in the ER. There was a gentleman in the ER who was being seen who had some medication with him. And as he was getting ready to leave and they gave him his possessions back, they found that he said, you know, hey, my pills are missing. They were narcotics. And so unfortunately, this preceptor tried to set up my EMT student. Now, thank God that this ER has cameras in it. And thankfully, because they did have those cameras in it, my EMT student was cleared. And that's why I got the phone call initially, because, you know, of this whole incident. But the student was cleared. And in fact, the preceptor was implicated. And just after this happened was when he made that, he made that sale in the parking lot with the undercover sheriff. So yeah, fun times as a program director. So what can we do to cure this or prevent this in the future? Well, there's a couple ways we can look at it. We can look at it proactively and we can look at it retroactively. Let's try proactively first. My suggestion would be, think about, as part of your admissions process of your initial education, requiring prospective students to take an assessment. And this assessment should measure the possible influence of moral theory on ethical decision making. What are some examples of that? Well, there's a lot of them. Back when Florence Nightingale and I were roommates in nursing school, we actually had to take the MMPI as part of our admissions process. There are still some programs that do that. But I would suggest the Hobbit 5. If you're not familiar with that, it's easy to look up. It's not real expensive, and it's a health occupations. It's made for health occupations, and it's a really it's a pretty cool test. It gives you lots of information. So that's one thing we can do. Well, what are the pros and cons with that, and who would pay for it? That's another question. But because I worked at a state or a community college, the question was, could this lead to denial of admission? Well, let's look at some of the pros. First of all, if we had an assessment like this, it could actually maybe help us determine if this prospective student would be a good fit for our program. And the same goes for employers. More and more, you know, it costs so much to go ahead and train and orient someone. And, you know, if they just come and not stay a long time and leave, that's a lot of money. We put a lot of money in orientation. So obviously, most employers are looking to hire a graduate that will stay there. It also helps a prospective employee in the interview process. Again, we already said how costly frequent turnover is. The other thing, though, too, is if you have a lot of turnover or a lot of people that are dismissed for disciplinary reasons, it can actually lead to some demoralization among the folks that are still there. And it also will help that employer determine if this person is a good fit in their corporate culture. Now, one of the things as a program director, when we did our graduate surveys is, you know, our graduates said, you know what, we don't really have trouble with, you know, what your students learn, their academics and stuff. It's more some of those affective domain issues. And some of that was, you know, being on time, you know, looking professional, that kind of stuff. So again, this was something that we were looking to do to kind of help with our employers feeling like we're listening to what their voices are and to kind of help some of our affective domain issues. And most importantly, this would allow us to graduate higher quality graduates for employment and again, help protect the public. So those are some of the pros that we came up with. But as with everything else, there are cons. Some of the cons are expense. Depending on which of these tests you use, they can be expensive. And, you know, in this world that we live in, especially after COVID, unfortunately, a lot of those expenses would be passed on to the student. Is this something that financial aid would cover? I don't know. The other thing is, too, that you got to make sure that if you're considering doing this, you have to have a validated tool. If you don't use a validated tool, then you could actually suffer some legal consequences, and we certainly don't want that. Some people will argue, especially if you are in a community college or a technical college that follows the open admissions policies, that it does not follow that. So again, that's a question for minds greater than mine to determine. but that is one of the cons that was listed. Now, this is a program director face if I ever saw one. I know I had this look quite a bit. Let's say the students are already in your program. Well, what can we do maybe to decrease some of the academic dishonesty for folks that are already in your program? How can we correct this trend? Well, my suggestion is, number one, you need to have some type of a college or school academic honesty website. You need to define what is academic honesty, what is academic dishonesty. Believe it or not, in several of the articles that I read, they were saying that these days students really don't know what's right, what's wrong. And with the increasing use of technology, sometimes that can muddy the waters even more. So definitely have some kind of an overall policy that is easily accessible on the website. Make sure that it's defined and list what are the consequences if this is not followed. When you do orientation or education sessions or information sessions, make sure that you include this information. Students need to know what's expected of them. Once they do enter your program, make sure that this is in your program handbook. Okay, at the beginning of each course, at the beginning of each session, make sure that this is explained again. One of the things that we did, and again, I learned this at an MC symposium, is you need to have students sign a learning contract at the beginning of the course and again, before clinicals and field internship. Now, you're not just going to give them a piece of paper that says, here, sign this. No. After you have all this information listed for them and you actually spend the time explaining and going over it with them, give them the opportunity to ask questions, answer the questions, and if you need to bring somebody in, like, one of your ethics folks or whatever, do that. But make sure the students understand what is okay and what is not okay, and that they understand the definitions. Okay, once they've done that, and they've had the opportunity to ask questions, then in that signature sheet, basically they're signing a statement that says, I have read this, I understand, I have had the opportunity to ask questions, I understand it, and I agree to abide by it. Print name, sign name, date, and then it goes in their academic folder. Okay, folks, please include an honor code or the EMT code of ethics. Very, very important. We do have that, and it should be included in their education process. As far as continuing education goes, same thing. Make sure you have a course syllabus for every course. If you're in a college or a technical college environment, you know what I'm talking about. It sets out expectations. Make sure, though, that it matches your organizational academic honesty policy. You don't want to have any variations. Again, consequences for violations, absolutely a must. And again, signature sheet is required. For those of you that are teaching in the continuing education environment, it's the same thing. Once you hire someone, this should be one of those documents that they sign, a learning contract. You should have them sign it upon their hire and yearly, just to remind them, hey, this is our expectation. If you don't understand it, please ask us about it. We'll answer it for you. You understand it? Yes, good, okay, sign date. And they, again, need to have those consequences clearly spelled out for them. And they need to understand that, yes, consequences can not only include, probation, suspension, or whatever, but it can also include dismissal and loss of certification or licensure. This is serious business. They need to understand that our culture is that we do not tolerate academic dishonesty. And lastly, hold your instructors accountable, not only in the initial education, but in your continuing education. Sometimes if you're an agency that provides their own continuing education and you have your own instructors, it is not easy to teach your peers. It is not. You can get a lot of pressure for them. Hey, can you give me the answers to the ACLS test or, ITLS, or, hey, you know what, I had a really bad, couple days, I'm having problems at home, whatever. Can you help me out here a little bit? It happens. But we need to hold not only our students accountable, but ourselves as instructors accountable. So again, yes, this does apply to continuing education, not just initial education. But I think the most important thing is that we have to mentor those students and those peers and those people who work for us. We need to walk the walk and we need to talk the talk. If we don't show that we are willing to live by what we preach, then it's not going to work, and we're actually causing more problems than good. We have to be willing to show people the way. We need to set the culture of our program. We need to tell people it's not okay to commit fraud, and academic dishonesty, no matter what the setting, is fraud. And they need to remember, they need to be aware of the consequences. So how do we mentor people? Well, there's a lot of different ways. If we're talking about the academic environment, make useful tests. Okay, if we're using quizzes and stuff, or you're having labs or simulations, it sometimes is okay to fail. I would tell my students, it is much better for you to make a mistake in the lab than it is to do it out in the field. This is a learning process. Labs are for learning, and kind of take some of that heat off. Okay. Initially, we're going to start out a little bit easier, okay, but we don't want to keep it too easy. We want to take those training wheels off eventually. And then we want to help them be more self-sufficient, okay? If we make it too difficult for them, it's only going to make them angry and frustrated, and they're just going to you know, our goal is not going to work, okay? We want to bolster confidence. Okay, we want to make our scenarios and our simulations realistic. We want to make it as close to possible as what they're going to see in the real world. Okay, so some of those concepts to keep in mind. Now, where can you get some resources on how to develop these kinds of programs in your agencies? Well, there's a thing called the International Center for Academic Integrity. It's based here in the United States, and it invites all of us as well as other concerned individuals to become involved in the increase in awareness of academic integrity for educational institutions. They have 6 fundamental values. Their values are honesty, trust, fairness, respect, responsibility, and courage. I like that. Isn't that what we want our employees to be? Isn't that what we want for the people who take care of our families and of ourselves to display? Absolutely. So this is a resource that you can use to give you some information. And again, what is their argument? Well, their premise is that if you have societies, educational institutions that are infused with integrity, they will help create a stronger civic culture for society as a whole. Again, what does this mean? This means walk the walk and talk the talk. Establish that culture in your school, your program, your agency of what you want it to be and what you want everyone to follow. Okay, so with academic integrity, again, my little duckies down there, you know, help them out, because students don't always know, well, is this right or is this wrong? So again, give them some style guides. We used to have our librarian come in and talk about plagiarism in the first week of school, because you know what? They're a lot better at explaining it than I was. Give them style guides. Tell them why it's important to avoid plagiarism. Teach them how to reference and cite, because they don't always do it intentionally. Sometimes they just don't know how to do it. And again, help educate them in the school citation styles. So again, these are just some of the things that we can do to help our students be successful and to demonstrate that academic integrity that we want them to show as students, and then also as graduates and future employees. Again, the reference I've cited for you here as well. So again, you know, the world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. Walk the walk, talk the talk. You've got to believe in what you say. And if you can't, then maybe you need to think about doing something else. And I know that sounds a little harsh. I don't mean to be harsh, but it's important. We have to demonstrate those values that we want our students and our graduates to demonstrate when they get out in the real world, so to speak. We have to be able to show them what to do. We have to help them understand what is okay, what is not okay, because they don't always know. And it's our job to help with that. I really liked this quote, and I wanted to share it with you before we move on to questions. If I may share this with you, my belief is that personal freedom cannot grow beyond personal responsibility. And I think this is so true, especially with everything that's going on now. The more people that learn to be fully accountable for their lives, the more freedom each of us can enjoy, and the more fulfilling all of our lives will be. And that's from Reed Consular. So I'm interested in knowing now, what do you think? Is this an issue for you in your programs, in your agency? What have you run across? Have you had any issues? What suggestions do you have? What has worked for you in the past? What suggestions or what advice can you offer the rest of us? Because I think one of the things that I always love about Symposium is that we can come together and share ideas and help each other out. So I'm anxious to hear what you think about this topic and any ideas you may have. So Nate, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's see if we have any questions or comments.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that presentation, Narina. That was great information. We do have a really great question and so far a couple of great comments to share. We'll start with the question. It's sort of a two-parter, but you've touched on it a little bit as we went through the presentation. Have you found any studies or examples that identify a difference between what activities people believe or not believe are actually cheating? And then also, what were your thoughts on whether that opinion of what is and is not cheating has been influenced by what's now possible with internet resources and increased technology in the classroom?
That's a great question. And actually, I did find an excellent article that I have listed in my references. I will tell you real quick. It's the article where I found the fraud triangle theory. It is an article for 2016, and the name of the article is Erosion of Academic Integrity in the Higher Education System, a Symbolization of Dishonesty. So yes, this article that I just mentioned, and again, it is cited, and that will be available on my references, had a lot of information on that, as well as a second article that was called Academic Integrity in the Online Learning Environment for Health Sciences Students. That was in Nurse Education Today. And again, this is from 2014, and it is also listed in my references. They actually, the second study that I just cited, they actually did a study. They had a group of students where they actually did some additional education as far as what is academic honesty and what isn't. And their results were that there was a significant post-intervention attitude scores were significantly improved compared to the baseline scores for the control group. And in fact, the p-value was less than 0.001. So that's a very significant study. So yes, to answer your question, there were several studies that discussed just what you were asking me. So thank you. That is an excellent question. If you want to email me too, I'm actually, let me go to that slide. I have my email here. I'd be happy to send you those references if you want to email me directly, and I can send you those links.
Awesome. And we did have a couple of comments I wonder if you would be interested to speak on. One of which was in reference to different ways that we can evaluate a student's maybe propensity for academic dishonesty. This individual said that they used to conduct interviews that included ethical dilemma role playing, and though it didn't necessarily eliminate applicants before they were able to get through the process, but the interviews gave them a pretty accurate insight into the character of the students.
That's an excellent idea. I know of some programs in my area that do include an interview process, and some of them do include ethical issues in some of their scenarios. I am more familiar with that actually on job interviews, but there's no reason that we couldn't do that in the school admissions as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the college that I retired from was a state college or a community college, so we had an open admissions policy. Because we had an open admissions policy, we were not allowed to conduct interviews as long as they met the basic requirements they were in. I wish that we could have done that. I think that's a wonderful idea. Again, if you're using a tool, I would be interested in knowing which tool you use and if it was validated or not, only to protect you from any legal issues, if that was in fact part of your admissions decision. That's a great comment. Thank you.
And our final comment, unless anyone else, please send in any questions and comments. If anyone out there has any nagging questions in the back of their head that they'd like to get out, we have some time left that we can discuss any of them. But we have another comment saying that most of the system members are doing all their training through in-house programs, as they take a very hard stance on academic dishonesty in their own training, since we don't want those people to be serving other citizens.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that. You know, it really depends where you work, who's doing your continuing education and all that, but I'm glad to hear that. Having done continuing education myself, I think that it is much more difficult to teach continuing education than it is to do initial education, because again, these are groups of your peers, they have attitudes, some good, some bad, and you know, it's difficult. So I think that's a great comment, and I thank you very much for sharing that.
We do have one more just came in at the end. So that just recognizes that we need to recognize everyone, that every student is going to learn differently. If we advocate for students with a deficit, then we can reduce a portion of the ethical problems we encounter.
Great comment, and I agree with you totally. You're absolutely right, and I wonder, you know, I have a good friend of mine who is a graduate of our paramedic program who has a child with special needs, and she was telling me now with everything going online for the elementary schools, how difficult it is for kids with special needs to get all the things that they need. And you're right, everybody does learn differently. Sometimes I think it can be more difficult to teach online and meet those needs than it would be to do face-to-face. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great idea.
Absolutely. Thank everyone in attendance for all of your comments and questions that you have sent in. And thank you so much, Dr. Stepanovsky, for taking the time out of your busy day to present this information with us. I know this is going to be a super valuable presentation, not only for those in attendance, but also for those watching after today's live stream. Everyone's going to be able to get some really valuable information from this. I do want to just say for everyone that's left on the stream that I did send a link in our chat window. Once this presentation concludes, then you can follow that link and you'll be able to register for CEU if you want your certificate after this presentation is over. I don't know, do you have any comments, Dr. Stepanovsky, before we go and log off? I think so far we've addressed everybody's questions.
Just a couple things, if I may. Thank you, Nate. Just a couple things. Number one, I wanted to just let you know, if you haven't seen the NEMC newsletter, there is going to be a virtual symposium this year. If you, Nate can probably talk a little more about that when I'm finished here, but because symposium had to be canceled because of COVID, they are going to be doing a virtual symposium that's coming up next month. Another thing too is, again, if you've not had an opportunity to take an Instructor 1 or Instructor 2 course through NEMC, they're really good classes. And if you get the chance, you know, avail yourself of those. They're very helpful. Just so you know, we are working on some new courses. I believe there's a lab skills class coming up, and I'm working on a program managers course. So there's a lot of things that are going to be coming down the pike. And finally, the last thing I wanted to say is that next year, God willing, if you know, we can have symposium again, it's actually going to be in Kissimmee, Florida, which is outside of Orlando. I hope to see many of you there. You know, hopefully this COVID thing will be gone by then. Finally, I wanted to thank you all for your attention today. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and I hope to see you all in the future. And Nate, thank you so much for your help.